I don't know what happened. I've dropped off before, but not everybody's dropped off.
Everybody dropped off.
Everybody dropped off. I'm going to say that was a
Zoom thing.
That was not me. That was Zoom. So I apologize for.
I was going to take it personally.
Everybody. Well, no, I've had tech problems before, but that was everybody just dropped off. So
Rabbi, can I just say something?
The meeting, the host ended the meeting.
I don't know if
I'm back.
I don't know if it's because I live up here now, but the racial divide is so apparent, and it's a topic, and we're all trying to address it. And that, I think, is the big problem. The haves, the have-nots, the black, the white, it's just.
Excuse me, I thought we were here for Torah study, not.
Okay. Diane, one second. Okay, so everybody, I will tell you, Diane, there definitely is. I want to tell you, I think that there is definitely, being up in the Bay Area is definitely going to give you a vision of things that are going on that, again, some of them are true, but it's definitely going to focus you on certain things. But I want to tell you, every one of us, it's not a black or white, rich or poor thing. Every one of us has a responsibility right now to do what we can to keep our country together. And one of the things that we got to do is, as much as, again, not shifting the blame from one person to the other, we have to make sure we're doing our part in our own sphere. And again, that's not, it's simple to say, hey, we got to give to charity, we got to give to the homeless shelters and stuff like that. Obviously, those are all what we're talking about. But it's also this feeling that we have that, again, we've got to work together, that we have to help each other. And how we do that, by the way, Diane, is not it's something that everybody should agree on. The bottom line is that we're responsible for each other. And that's the thing that bothers me about both, again, Republicans and Democrats right now, is they're pointing fingers and they're not working together. They're looking at people as the other, and that is something that has got to stop. I'll tell you that's the thing that really worries me right now. So I'm letting everybody in. I think I got everybody back in. But again, all of us got to do our part. We can only change ourselves. We can change society. Everybody wants to change society, but we got to change ourselves first. That's all we can do. That's all we can really do. We can dream about changing society, but we got to work on ourselves. So, looking at what it means to be at Sinai and looking at what happens, we get to that point, by the way, with, by the way, let me just make sure I want to get back on Facebook, and I want to share. Yeah, I got knocked off of Facebook too. So, I want everybody, as we look forward to reading this, the 10 Commandments actually is going to be 2 chapters. We have 2 chapters to read before we get to the actual text. The actual 10 Commandments is kind of at the end of this portion. And so we forget that there's stuff before the 10 Commandments. And I do want to give that its proper due, because, again, this portion is named after Yitro for a reason. It says, Vayishma Yitro Kohen Midian. Jethro, the priest of Midian, heard Moses' father-in-law, don't want to leave that part out, heard all that God had done for Moses and for Israel, his people, how the Lord had brought Israel from out of Egypt. Again, Yetziat Mitzrayim. Right there at the beginning, we have Moses' father-in-law hears what God had done for Israel. Now, what's interesting about this is that it says that Yitro brought Moses, and again, it says Moses' father-in-law again. Like, didn't we just have it right there? Moses' father-in-law again. By Kach Yitro Choten Moshe, again, same thing. Moses' father took Tzipporah, Moses' wife, after she had been sent home, and her 2 sons, of whom one is named Gershom, that is to say, I've been a stranger in a foreign land, and the other was named Eliezer, meaning the God of my father was my help, by the way, and he delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh, which is an explanation of Eliezer's name, which we don't really get. earlier on when we're introduced to them. What's interesting about this is that we never hear about them getting sent home. This is the first time we've heard that they were sent home. We know that they're with Moses when he goes back to Egypt after the burning bush. We read about that a couple of weeks ago, right? At the beginning of Shemot, we read when Moses goes back to Egypt, he takes his family with him. But at some point, they're not together anymore because Yitro reunites them. So we don't know why. We don't know when, why she's not with, and they're not with Moses. Why they went back. Again, we don't know a lot about Moses as a father and as a husband, but it does seem that there's a good part of the last few chapters that the family wasn't there for. I mean, was the family not there for the plagues? Did Moses get his family out of there because he didn't want them to be around? I mean, it's all speculation. Did she want to go home? And did he send her home because she didn't want to be there? Was the job too much for Moses that he couldn't focus on freeing the people and being a father and husband at the same time? We don't know, but it is troubling. It's a question at the very least. And I think it also kind of begs the question, how hard is it to be a leader and to be a father at the same time, or a mother? How hard is it to be effective at doing these kinds of jobs while at the same time being a person of being a responsible part of a family? And it's a fair question to ask. It's not the only reason why priests aren't married, but I mean, one of them is because they don't have to worry about having their flock take them away from their family and having to balance that. So rather than balancing that, you just take it away. You just remove that. So this is a interesting question, and there are a lot more questions that come out of it. There's not a lot of answers. But Yitro does something that, again, our ancestors, the rabbis, felt thousands of years ago was a tremendous mitzvah, which is reuniting a family and helping to create shalom bayit, helping to create peace in a house. And so they make the argument that one of the reasons why Yitro has arguably the most important Torah portion named after him, the portion of the Ten Commandments, is because he performs this ultimate mitzvah of doing family repair, of helping a family. And so he helps the family. He helps his own family, of course. It's not just any family. It's his son-in-law and his wife and his grandkids. So it says that Yitro, Moses' father-in-law, brought Moses' son and wife in the wilderness, to him in the wilderness, where he was encamped at the mountain of God. It says Har HaElohim. So later on, it is going to specifically say Mount Sinai, but at this point, it says the mountain of God. He sent word to Moses, I, your father-in-law, Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and your 2 sons. So he let them know ahead of time that he was coming. Moses went out to meet his father-in-law. He bowed low and kissed him. Each asked after the other's welfare, and they went into the tent. By the way, it doesn't say anything about what Moses did with his family. I don't want to dwell on this because we don't know. It doesn't say. But it is interesting that he's talking to doesn't say he went out and kissed his wife. It says he went out and kissed his father-in-law, and he bowed low to him, which, by the way, shows you the honor that he gave to his father-in-law, which, by the way, is interesting because it shows you how, again, Moses was a humble person and was never one to forget to show proper respect to people, including, by the way, a Midianite priest, somebody who's not even an Israelite. And so he shows this great reverence to his father-in-law. And then it says Moses recounted his father-in-law everything that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardships that had befallen them on the way, and how the Lord had delivered them. And Jethro rejoiced over all the kindness that the Lord had shown Israel when he delivered them from the Egyptians. Blessed be the Lord, Jethro said, who delivered you from the Egyptians and from Pharaoh, and who delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods, yes, by the result of their very schemes against the people. So what's interesting about this is that Yitro seems to recognize God, Lord, Hashem, as the greatest of gods. Now, he doesn't say he's the only God. He doesn't recognize that there's only one God, but he says that this is the best God, which is maybe all that he can do as a Midianite. All he can do is say God must be the greatest God. And from his vantage point, it's proven by what God has done for Moses and for the people. And so he recognizes God as the greatest, not the only, but the greatest. Maybe that's enough. Yitro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and sacrifices for God. And Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to partake of the meal before God with Moses' father-in-law. By the way, you notice how many times it uses the word Moses' father-in-law.
Mm-hmm.
Im choten Moshe. So choten Moshe is used all the time. And it's interesting that in Hebrew, by the way, father-in-law is actually a title. It's choten is a father-in-law. It's like chatan, which is a groom, but a choten is a father-in-law. So in interestingly, if you think about it, in English, we don't really have a word for father-in-law. It's father-in-law, but father-in-law is actually a description which became a name, right? A title. In Hebrew, it's actually a word. There's a word for it. The choten, it's a word. So what's interesting is there's a word for it, that relationship in Hebrew. And it does kind of indicate how important family is in Judaism when we have words for things that we don't have in English. And so we have a word obviously in Hebrew for your wife or husband's family, right? Well, we know it in Yiddish, but it's Hebrew, machatonim, right? Machatonim are your in-laws. But in English, the word in-laws, first of all, has a connotation that it's a legal relationship, which I guess you can make the argument. Marriage is a legal institution. But there's something strange about the title in-law versus machatonim. Because if you think about it, the term machatonim really means family. Not by law.
Right.
It is by law, but it's a family relationship. It's a relationship. And there's something very special about the fact that we have a word for that in Hebrew and we don't have a word for it in English, really. And by the way, people, that's a fairly new term, by the way, in-laws, calling people your in-laws when you're talking about your wife or husband's family, that's a fairly new term. It kind of like morphed as people talked about their mother-in-law or sister-in-law. They just called it the in-laws, but it's not an old term in English. So it tells you a little bit about family and the value of family in Judaism. So over and over again, it calls Moshe's father-in-law Yitro his choten Moshe. The next day, Moses sat as a magistrate among the people, and you guys remember this scene. This is a critical scene in the story. While the people stood about Moses from morning until evening. But when Moses' father-in-law saw how much he had to do for the people, he said, "What is this thing that you're doing to the people? Why do you act alone while all the people stand about you from morning until evening?" Moses replied to his father-in-law, "It's because the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have a dispute, it comes before me, and I decide between one person and another, and I make known the laws and teachings of God." But Moses' father-in-law said to him, "The thing you're doing is not right. You will surely wear yourself out, and these people as well, for the task is too heavy for you. You cannot do it alone. That's a really powerful phrase.
Mhm.
Because first of all, he says, what you're doing, you think you're doing a good thing, but it's not right. It's not good. It's lo tov. That's the Hebrew word for it, lo tov. It's not a good thing. You think you're doing good, but you're not. And what's so amazing about that is it shows you that sometimes our best intentions are really not, it's not well served. We're actually not helping ourselves and the people that we're trying to help. And that's what he says to him. It's not good for you, but it's also not good for them. It's not good for the people. Because you can imagine if you're sitting there waiting in line for Moses, by the time you get there by the end of the day, I say that kind of again because people are doing that with their vaccines right now, but it puts people not in a good mood when they're waiting and they're hoping to get something done. And even though it's all for a good cause, people don't like it when they have to wait, and they don't like having to go through a system of lines and everything else when everyone's just trying to help them. Well, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work because everyone's well intended, but the system is failing. And so that's what's happening here, is that Yitro is like the ultimate consultant. He's not even asked to come in, but of course he's a perceptive and wise man. And so he says to Moses, this system isn't working. You need to change it. It's not good for anybody, not good for you or for the recipients. So he says, listen to me and I will give you counsel, and God be with you. You represent the people before God, and you bring the disputes before God and enjoin upon them the laws and the teachings, and make known to them the way they are to go and the practices they are to follow. You also shall seek, though, among the people, capable men who fear God, trustworthy men who spurn ill-gotten gain. Set them as chiefs of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens, and let them judge the people at all times. Have them bring every major dispute to you, but let them decide every minor dispute themselves. Make it easier for yourself by letting them share the burden with you. So this is the ultimate delegation of authority in creating a pyramid of help, of people who can support you and become, and again, they just came out of Egypt. It's kind of funny to think about a pyramid, but that's what this is. It's a pyramid structure where you at the top get to deal with only the most difficult cases, and the other people can help you along the way and help you by getting those other issues that are easier to deal with, get those solved. And so when you look at what these people are going to be, and these are called shoftim, these are judges. If you look at what they have to be capable men who fear God. These are all the qualifications. Trustworthy men who spurn ill-gotten gain. Those are all qualifications that these people have to have. So they have to be honest. They have to be people who can't be bribed, or who won't be turned by some extra attention. They also have to be God-fearing. They have to understand that, again, there is an absolute authority that they have to answer to. And again, one could argue the first thing is they got to be capable. They actually have to be able to do the job. So they have to have those qualifications: honesty, integrity, again, faith and belief in a moral authority in God. And then of course they have to be able to do the job. So these are all things that are required. And again, how do you find those people? Not easy, but you have to do it, Moses. And Yitro says, if you do this and God so commands you, you will be able to bear up, and all these people too will go home unwearied. So he says, I think you should do it. Check with God. See if God wants it to. But if you could get to do this, everything is going to be much better for everybody. So it says, Moses heeded his father-in-law and did just as he had said. Moses chose capable men out of all Israel and appointed them heads over the people, chiefs of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. So you can see what happens here is that Moses picks people, and they're people that are capable men, Anshe Chayil, which is another way of saying valiant men or courageous men, capable men. But what's very interesting about this is that this is not based on whether they were elders of a tribe. These are not those types of people. These are people who come through a meritocracy, and they're chosen by their capabilities, not by their birth, not by their tribe, not by, again, what clan they're from or which subgroup they're from, but based on their capabilities. So these people are the judges. And it says they judge the people at all times. The difficult matters they would bring to Moses, and all the minor matters they would decide themselves. And then it says Moses bade his father-in-law farewell, and he went his way to his own land. So what's interesting is that Yitro doesn't stay with them. He goes back to his land. He doesn't stay with his family, doesn't stay with the Israelites. He goes back to his people. So Yitro does this amazing thing in chapter 18 of reuniting the family, but he also helps Moses be a better leader. So let's get into now the Ten Commandments. Because first, before we get the Ten Commandments, we get the narrative of what happened in order for the Ten Commandments to be coming to the people. Any questions or comments about the first section, about the Yitro section? Well,
it's very well. That's how consultants work. They don't stay with you all the time. They come, give advice, and leave you to follow through or not. And Moses followed through. That was very nice to see.
That's a great point. So a really good consultant. And again, I know you guys have consulted before with people. I know you did that with Lee for, lots of people. I mean, technically speaking, that's kind of what you do as a therapist, right?
Yes.
Your model is to not have to be with people all the time. You like being able to have people not be dependent on you all the time.
Right.
And that is a really great model of guidance, right? And again, probably goes back even to and a bigger level with family, with, again, how do we best parent or lead as mine, not necessarily sitting on the person all the time, giving them advice and helping them, but again, empowering them to do their own work is a good point.
If they don't have the tools, you teach them the tools that they can take and then use in the future.
Exactly. Yeah. Very good point. That is important for Yitro to go back. So, bless you. So let's take a look on the third day. On the third moon. Third day will come up too. The third is important in this story. But this is on the third new moon after the Israelites had gone forth from the land of Egypt. On that very day, they entered the wilderness of Sinai. So they come into the Sinai. So it seems as though it's kind of like step backwards from where the previous sentence or the previous chapter takes place at Mount Sinai. This is kind of explaining how we got to Mount Sinai. So it kind of goes backwards a little bit because it tells us, and again, the third new moon afterwards would mean that a couple of months have passed. Let's say they left on a full moon. We're gone for 1 month, one new moon, which would have been 15 days later. A second one, which would have been about 28 days later, puts us at about 43 days. And then another 28 days later, another new moon. On that new moon, which would put us at about 70 days later, that's about how long it was by the time that they got there. And again, this is why we come up with Shavuot being, about 2 months after they left. Now, again, it's a little bit more. It's not exactly Shavuot time, but close. It's about that time that they came into to Mount Sinai or to the Sinai Desert, and where they're going to get the Ten Commandments. So that's why Shavuot is always a couple months well, literally 50 days after Passover. So it's roughly around this time that they were at Mount Sinai. And it tells us that they journeyed from Rephidim. They entered the wilderness of Sinai and encamped in the wilderness. Israel encamped there in front of the mountain. And Moses went up to God. And again, there's a little jumping around here. I will, again, just kind of caution you that it kind of jumps around a little bit. The Lord called to him from the mountain, thus saying, thus say, you shall say to the house of Jacob and declare to the children of Israel, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians, how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to me. Now then, if you will obey me faithfully and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasure possession among all the peoples. Indeed, all the earth is mine, but you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh. Those two descriptions, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the children of Israel. Now, it kind of now goes to this next description, which says Moses. So they don't get the words yet, but they get the words that they need to know to get the words. Moses came and summoned the elders of the people and put before them all that the Lord had commanded him. All the people answered as one, saying, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. And Moses brought back the people's words to the Lord. Now, the question, of course, here is but they haven't had the word yet. What word is it that they've agreed to? So the rabbis like to point out that the people said, we'll do, even before they heard. Could be, again, that there's kind of roughly two stories here that got combined. But regardless, the rabbis taught from this that the people say na'aseh before they say nishma. Before they heard it, we heard it, they say we'll do it. Which means that the Israelites, the Jewish people, are hungry for the Torah and will do it even before they actually hear what's in the Ten Commandments. So there's a lot of midrashim about what happens at that moment. And again, why the Jews? And the Jews were the only people, according to the Midrash, that would take the Torah even before they heard what was in it. They knew it was God's. They knew it was good. So they wanted to take it. It's one of the learnings, one of the teachings that we take away from this. But again, it's strange. I said it's a strange structure.
It is, but it's also, he said there would be a covenant, a contract with the Lord. So they knew they were going to agree with an agreement with the Lord.
Yeah. But what's interesting is normally
you read the contract part of it.
Normally you say, yeah, I signed it after I pretended to read it. Which again, when you're sitting there and signing a contract at the auto dealership,
right,
very few people are going to read the whole contract, but the general terms of it. You read the first page.
Exactly.
You read the first page pretty carefully, and then you go, I can't, I'm done. So this doesn't even happen, right? There's no terms yet. But again, you can make the argument it's God. We know that it's going to be good. People have already proven that they're not so faithful already, but this is a good thing. Everybody's always said this is an example of Israel at its highest, willing to take on the commandments before they even hear it. So this is the midrash is that this is what sets the Jewish people apart, is our willingness to take on the Torah before we even really know what's in it. So it says, the Lord said to Moses, I'm going to come down to you in a thick cloud in order that the people may hear when I speak with you and so trust you ever after. So this has a little to do with Moses being on the mountain. So it says, Moses reported the people's words to the Lord. And the Lord said to Moses, go to the people and warn them to stay pure today and tomorrow. Let them wash their clothes. Let them be ready for the third day. So again, the three. And on the third day, the Lord will come down in the sight of all the people on Mount Sinai. So again, what makes this special is that God is actually going to be talking to all the people. So this is going to be not a this is not a normal occurrence in the sense that Moses is speaking to the people. This is God speaking to the people right now. And this is going to be this is obviously something that is unique in the history of the Jews, and from what we know, the history of the world, where people all get to hear the word, not just one group of people. So here's what happens. Okay, one second. This is where we're actually going to get into, hold it one second. We're going to get into the words of the 10 Commandments. Hold on one second. I want to make sure this is up. And because it's not on Facebook. Somebody just texted me that this is not on Facebook right now. Not good. All right. I definitely want people who are on Facebook to be able to hear the 10 Commandments. It's always an exciting thing when we get to read the 10 Commandments. All right. So, you shall set bounds for the people round about, saying, beware of going up the mountain or touching the border of it. Whoever touches the mountain shall be put to death. No hand shall touch him, but he shall either be stoned or shot. Man or beast or man, he shall not live. When the ram's horn sounds a long blast, they may go up on the mountain. So there is a point when they can go on the mountain, but not until they hear that shofar sound. Moses came down from the mountain to the people and warned the people to stay pure, and they washed their clothes. And he said to the people, be ready for the third day. Do not go near a woman. Now, I guess you could say that that's clearly being directed at the men, but the understanding here is, again, that the people were supposed to be in a state of purity with washed clothes, and to be literally, to be almost like in a state of complete holiness on this day. And again, from this, we kind of deduce that on a holiday like Yom Kippur, that we don't engage. I mean, one of the things that's not supposed to be done on Yom Kippur is to have sexual relations, because again, when the people are getting the 10 Commandments, when they're in this holy state, they're not supposed to be, they were not supposed to be intimate during this time. It says so. And again, it's not just they're supposed to be pure. It says right there. On the third day, as morning dawned, there was thunder and lightning and a dense cloud upon the mountain, and a very loud blast of the horn. And all the people who were in the camp trembled. All right, so that's the sound of the shofar. Moses led the people out of the camp toward God and took their places at the foot of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was all in smoke, for the Lord had come down upon it in fire. The smoke rose like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled violently. The blare of the horn grew louder and louder. As Moses spoke, God answered him in thunder. The Lord came down upon Mount Sinai on the top of the mountain, and the Lord called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. Now, I will tell you, it does seem disjointed there. And again, why is there this coming and going? Why does it seem like Moses was there and then he's not there? And, it is sometimes thought that it's the work of different authors. That's not really the point. Both authors actually kind of agree on one thing, which was there was a point in time when no one was supposed to be on the mountain except for Moses. It says the Lord came down upon Mount Sinai on the top of the mountain, and the Lord called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. The Lord said to Moses, go down, warn the people not to break through to the Lord to gaze, lest many of them perish. The priests also who come near the Lord must stay pure, lest the Lord break out against them. But Moses said to the Lord, the people cannot come to Mount Sinai, for you warned us, saying, set bounds around the mountain and about the mountain and sanctify it. So the Lord said to him, go down and come back together with Aaron, but let not the priests or people break through to come to the Lord. lest he break out against them, which again is weird because God is talking about himself in the third person there. And it says, Moses went down to the people and spoke to them. Now that's the last line of what happens before the Ten Commandments, because at least when it seems as though this whole interaction of Moses going up and down off the mountain, and again, I know it's a little disjointed. It seems kind of like cut and pasted together, and it's not really clear what is exactly going on here. The last word that we have is that Moses is back down with the people. And it seems as though, at least I would say the main takeaway from this is the people were not supposed to come up in the mountain when God was speaking and when God was on the mountain, that the mountain again became holy ground. And so the Ten Commandments begins with these words. And so Moses went down to the people and spoke to them, but it's not, again, the next line says that God spoke these words saying, all these words saying, which again, it doesn't say God spoke the Ten Commandments to the people. Nowhere here does it say these are the Ten Commandments. It doesn't say that here. We say they're the Ten Commandments. The Bible later on calls them the Ten Commandments, but it doesn't say that here. These are the words that God speaks. And so the intro line to that is God spoke all these words saying, Vaydaber Adonai et kol hadavarim ha'ele lemor, that God spoke these words. And again, assumedly, this is God speaking to everybody, not just Moses and Aaron, not just the elders, that everybody heard this. And here's what they heard. Here's what we heard. The first line, Anochi Adonai Elohecha, asher hotzeiticha me'eretz Mitzrayim mibeit avadim. I, the Lord, am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage. Is that the first commandment or opening? Is that a commandment? It's more of a statement. It's a prologue. It's the opening. It's the opening refrain or opening statement, which makes everything else follow. Preamble, if you will. But what does it say? It says, I am the God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. This is why the Exodus is so important. That's why, again, I'm going to direct you to the book, the Exodus, Richard Friedman's book. Why does this book get this point across? The Exodus is what allows for God to say to us, I brought you out of Egypt, and I brought you out of Egypt as part of the covenant. The covenant is established with you because of what I did, and here now is the covenant. So the covenant is established by the act of the Exodus. It says so right at the beginning. I mean, there's a reason why that's there. You can make the argument, again, that's why it's so important. What's such an important moment? Of course, this moment right now is a very important moment. And here we get the Ten Commandments. Some people put these two lines together and have it as one commandment, which is, I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. You shall have no other gods besides me. It could also be read that this first commandment is just that one line. You shall have no other gods besides me. So again, sometimes it's read as one commandment, those two lines together, and there's a preamble and then there's the statement. It can be read different ways. Again, that's all based on the idea that we want to get to the 10. So let's assume that that's the first commandment. The idea that you're not, again, against no other gods, no polytheism. The next commandment is, you shall not make yourself a sculptured image or any likeness of what is in the heavens above or in the earth below or in the waters under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord, am your God. I am an impassioned God, visiting the guilt of the parents upon the children, upon the third and upon the fourth generation of those who reject me, but showing kindness to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. So that is the commandment against idolatry. And actually, again, again, it's not the same as polytheism, though it's connected, but this one says specifically about making sculptured images or likenesses to worship. Now, again, it doesn't say that you're not supposed to make them to worship them. It says first, you're not supposed to make them, which is why some people say it should be read as kind of two laws together, or at least a law that is more strict within itself, because it says you shall not make yourself sculptured images. Is that specifically so you shall not bow down to them, or is it a prohibition against any sculptured image? Is it against any image of anything that you're going to make that shouldn't be a sculpture? And so some people read it that way. Some people read it as you're not supposed to do any sculptures or three-dimensional images of anything that is an animal or a human being that could be that even if it couldn't be, even if you don't intend it to be worshipped, because God forbid somebody should worship it. It could be made an idol, and then you've made an idol. So this is a prohibition against idols. It's against idolatry. Anybody have any comments about that part? Any insights or anything that people have on that? Nope. Again, as I mentioned before, this is why Jews used to not engage in any type of arts, that visual arts that required sculptures or even paintings of humans or animals that could be seen as contributing to idolatry, even intentionally, unintentionally, anyway. Just don't do it. And so people really didn't engage in visual arts. The only type of art that Jews used to engage in was doing geometric art, geometric patterns. No animals, and again, even there were some who use animals but not people. So we have like these beautiful Haggadot that are made. One of the most famous is called the bird's head Haggadah, which has people, but it doesn't have people's faces in it. It only has birds' heads for them because people didn't want to have pictures of Moses or of people. So some people took this law very, very seriously. So it wasn't just sculpture, but it was any type of visual image of a person.
You could also look at this as a third way. You shall have no other gods before me. And then the next two, you shall not make a sculptured image, you shall not bow down. Those two could be explanations of number one.
And there are some people who read that this is all part of it together. Yeah. That the commandment against polytheism and idolatry are all together. One could really make that argument because, again, it does seem connected. And, when people are trying to arrive at the 10 Commandments, they'll come up with that. But it doesn't necessarily, you could make the argument that that is all part of, again, this commandment against worshiping other gods, multiple gods, and gods that you would make into images. But again, interestingly, today I was talking with our religious school kids, and they picked up on this part. One of the girls, one of our very insightful young women, said, "Wait, that doesn't seem fair. Why is God punishing the third and fourth generations? Why is God punishing kids who are not responsible for what their parents did?" So it's a good point. There's actually a part later on in the Torah where God says, I'm not going to hold the next generations responsible for the sins of the fathers. I don't hold children responsible for the sins of their parents. So there's a part of the Bible later on that kind of goes against that. But it does say, again here, third and fourth generation. So I talked about it with the kids a little bit. First of all, what's interesting about it is that people who focus on the first part forgot the second part, which is that while God is remembering and punishing people for 3 or 4 generations, he's rewarding people 1,000 generations later. So wouldn't those things cancel themselves out? So we're not even we're about 100 generations removed from this. You can imagine 1,000 generations. If it's 30 years, let's say if it's 30 years for a generation, even 20 years for a generation, we're talking about 100, 150 generations ago we're at Mount Sinai. So we're well within the 1,000th generation. 3 or 4 generations, again, is pretty tough. But compared to 1,000 generations, it's nothing. So it's actually saying that God is far more merciful and far more forgiving and mindful of goodness and focusing on the good stuff much longer than God is remembering the bad stuff.
Mhm.
So that's a nice thing. That's also important to remember. We don't want to just focus on the part of that. But I also talked to the kids about something pretty interesting. And I think they understood this part too. They might not have gotten that first point that I made, but I think they understood this part, which is the ultimate truth of this, which is that as much as we would like to not be responsible for the things that our ancestors did, we are. And whether we like it or not, there are people whose names and reputations are ruined because of what their parents did. And obviously we have examples of those in the modern day. I'm talking about people like Bernie Madoff, who, had a son who committed suicide not long after, his horrible activities. And remember, he's still alive, but both of his sons are dead now. One died of illness and the other one died of suicide. And that some of those grandchildren don't carry his name anymore. They chose to change their names. So there are examples of the fact that whether or not we don't like this or whether or not we are feeling it's unfair, it's real. And the reality is the people who do really bad things, oftentimes that stain stays on their families for generations.
And there's a good thing here too, however. Showing kindness to the 1,000th generation, it shows we're not even near the end of the world. When people threaten that global warming or this or that is going to end the world, we're not even near to it.
Well, it does make you feel hopeful, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
1,000th generation. Though I don't know for humanity, though, whether we're in the 1,000th generation of how long humans have been around. But that's not the point. The point is, you're right. There's something hopeful here. But I will tell you, I also said to the kids something also that was important, which I think got home about this 3rd or 4th generation. I said, listen, we have people who live in Germany today whose grandparents and in some cases great grandparents were Nazis. Mm-hmm. And they still very much live with the guilt and the shame of that experience. Mm-hmm. And one of the girls said, but they should, because there are survivors of the Holocaust that are still alive. And I said, that's a very good point. As long as those survivors are around, you're right. There is a level of responsibility that Germans feel towards it. Mm-hmm. But my guess is that it's going to last at least 3 or 4 generations, that Germans are going to live with the stain of Nazism, and they'll live with that for 3 or 4 generations, at least. So it really does happen. And to say that it shouldn't happen or it's not fair, it's very difficult to argue that this doesn't happen, because
it does.
We don't know how to. I mean, we're, as human beings, we recognize that there are things that happen that are generational stains, that they will not be gone in a generation. So there's a truth to this that I think is really powerful and is not one that that I'm willing to just kind of say it's not true, because it is true, and it's true whether the Torah tells us this or not. It's true because it's true because of human beings and the fact that this is what we do. But again, we focus on the good part as well, which is that God remembers stuff for the 1,000th generation. So that's a good thing, really good thing. So those are the first couple of commandments. Then we get to this commandment: you shall not swear falsely by the name of the Lord your God. For the Lord will not clear one who swears falsely by his name. So it reminds us here again not to swear by God's name. And again, some people take this law and take it very seriously to the extent that they won't use God's name at all. They'll say Hashem, or they'll say the name, or they'll say Adonai, which means Lord. We don't say God's name. We don't pronounce God's name. And so we still take it very seriously to this day. And again, literally it says not to swear by God's name, not to use God's name, invoke God's name in a promise or an oath, which is something we don't do very often. So, or most of us don't, I don't think. We've gotten this. We actually, I think we kind of, naturally, or not naturally, but a lot of us kind of were raised with this kind of idea, and we don't do it. That's the what we'd say the third commandment is. But the fourth commandment we get here is Zachor et Yom HaShabbat lekadsho. Now look how long this commandment is. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God. You shall not do any work. You, your son, your daughter, your male or female slave, or your cattle, or the stranger who is within your settlements. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth and sea and all that is in them. And he rested on the seventh day. And therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it, made it holy. Vayikadshehu. So it begins with this idea of holiness. Shabbat is holiness. And it ends with this idea of God's holiness. Now there's so much to look at. First of all, just look at the length of it. It's 4 verses. And it goes on quite a bit of detail. There's a reason for it, because this is a Sabbath for God. But it also is very specific in the way that you follow it. That again, it's not just you, but everybody in your house and anyone who you're responsible for, including your animals, which by the way reminds us that animals need to be treated with compassion as well. That animals can't be worked on Shabbat and deserve a day off. It's a pretty amazing idea too. This idea of this compassion we have for animals is in the 10 Commandments. It's there. You just read it. But again, you can see how important Shabbat is. It's the only ritual that's mentioned in the 10 Commandments. It's the only ritual. It's the only holiday. It's the only action that is uniquely Jewish that is in the 10 Commandments. All the rest of the commandments, one could argue, are, if not universal, at least probably followed by, as you're going to see, by most people. And if not legislated, if they're not legislated, again, there's no legislation about what you do with God, but there is, and there is in some countries, but there is a sense here of universality, except for Shabbat. But because it's in the 10 Commandments, and because everything else around it is so universal and seems so powerfully timeless and eternal, that there have always been Christians who've been reluctant to give up on Shabbat, which is why we have Sabbatarian groups. We have groups that continue to keep Shabbat. So technically any Sabbatarian group, which refers to Christian denominations, those are denominations that keep the seventh day as Shabbat. Now, this obviously, the largest group in our country is the Seventh-day Adventists. But there have been groups keeping Shabbat, Christian groups, since the beginning of Christianity. And so it was actually later on in the development of Christianity that Christians moved to Sunday services. And that was primarily to differentiate from Jews. Originally, Christians would go to church or have their, even before they called it church, they'd have their worship gatherings on Shabbat because they recognized that Shabbat is the Lord's day, is a day that we were supposed to be not working and we're making holy, making it Kodesh. So there have been Sabbatarian groups for a long time. There was a group in Russia called the Subbotniki who started keeping Shabbat years and years ago and started following Sabbath. Some of them actually became Jewish. But there are groups all around the world who've kind of come to Shabbat by reading the Bible and figured why are we not doing this? So it's becoming more and more common amongst Christian groups to have services on Saturdays, or at least to have a service on a Saturday night, in order to kind of fulfill that Sabbath requirement and the importance that it has in the Bible. So it's difficult to read the Bible and not see how important Shabbat is. So think about those Sabbath keepers, if you will. And again, it's in the Ten Commandments. But it's still, and again, one can make the argument, it's preserved in the language of Christians as well. Because again, for those who are familiar with Spanish, for example, how do we say Saturday in Spanish? Somebody.
Sábado.
Uh-huh.
Sábado.
Which is the Sabbath. So some people have thought about that before, but you might not have thought about that before, is that in Spanish, it's still called the Sabbath, Saturday. Again, I don't know how many Catholics, especially Spanish-speaking Catholics, really think about that, but I think it's pretty interesting for us as Jews to know that the residence of Shabbat hasn't left the world, and it is one of the great gifts that the Jewish people have given the world. And I think sometimes we as Jews forget how much of a treasure the Sabbath is. I'm reading more and more, especially lately in the last year, from people who've decided, Christians that is, who've decided to give up social media, for example, on the seventh day, on having a day off, having a Shabbat. I forget who I was just reading was talking about it, of having at least one day off on Saturdays from social media. There's a whole group of Christians that have done this. So you're seeing it more and more coming about in the Christian world, is using the seventh day as a day to at least tune out from some of the anger and the distractions and the things that keep us from being the holiest that we can be. So I will tell you, it's becoming more and more popular. And my guess is you're going to hear it more and more as more and more people get sucked in and drained out by social media arguments and that kind of negativity. You're going to see more and more people searching for that, which might be a unintended benefit of well, maybe we have to get crazy before we get smart. And that seems to be the case of what's happening. But you can see why Shabbat is so important to us. It's one of the 10 Commandments. So again, talk about it a little bit, talk about it the whole time, how important Shabbat is and how wonderful Shabbat is for us, and how great it could be for the world if people really did have that day where they focused on the most important things in the world, which again, just to be grateful, to take a day to be grateful. I think it's obviously so important. And as we come to the fifth commandment, which is the first one that actually specifically deals with people, even though the last one does too, by the way. I talked to the kids today about which one is really about people. Where do they start talking about people? Well, this one definitely does. Honor your father and mother that you may long endure on the land that the Lord your God is assigning you. So parents are honored. And again, this definitely shifts the commandments, now shift from God-related ones, theological ones, to ones that deal with human behavior. But one can make the argument that Shabbat starts off with, and definitely is about God, but it's also about the way we treat people on the day that God has given us. So you start to see the way we treat people even in that. But here with our parents, there's also a little transition going on between God and us, because it says that if we honor our parents, then we will long endure on the land that God is assigning you. Now, normally we understand that literally, that we get to live in the land of Israel if we follow this commandment. It's the only commandment that we have where it actually tells us what the benefit is of doing it, that there's a reward for doing it. The only one is honoring your parents. It's interesting. But if we don't live in Israel, and for a long time Jews did not live in Israel at all, or very few of them got to live in Israel, had the great experience of living in the land of Israel, how important that is. But if you don't live in Israel, it could also be understood this way, that wherever you live, your life will be lengthened if you honor your parents. That you'll long endure on the land that the Lord has given you, wherever you are, wherever God has assigned it to you. So if God's assigned you to live in Santa Clarita or Houston or San Jose, then that's the land God gives you. So there could be understood living in the land of Israel, or it could be, again, you just get to stay around a long time if you honor your parents. So it's interesting that, again, this is considered to be the focal point of longevity. It's interesting that looking ahead to the future, which is long enduring in the land, is actually by taking care of those who came before you. What ensures your future? Taking care of those who came before you. You're a link in a chain, and in order for that link to exist, you have to be linked to those that came before you. You can't be a link in a chain if you're the only link. If you're not hooked to something before, how can anything be hooked to you? And so it's so interesting that the way we live for the future is by taking care of those who got us to where we are. So it's a beautiful phrase. Of course, we have another place in the Torah, in Leviticus, where it says to revere your mother and your father. It's reversed. That is a little different phrase in a different order of the parents. But here the father comes first. Some people say that the difference is because here, where it says to honor, it's reversed. It's in different orders because it's the opposite of what you would normally do. And so the Torah is telling you to honor your father, even though you may be more likely to honor your mother. You're supposed to honor your father as well. And maybe it puts it first because it's the one you're less likely to do. When it says to revere or fear, it could also be translated as fear your mother and your father. They reversed it there. So it's reversed there so that you fear your mother, might be more likely to fear your father. Maybe, I don't know. This is all, these are all long commentaries from long ago, but they are in different orders and there's slightly different words used in those phrases of honoring our parents. By the way, honoring your parents is different than doing everything that they say. It's also different than having feelings about your parents that you can't have, which I don't want to get into, but there definitely are complex relationships that people have with your parents. Honoring your parents is different than loving your parents, listening to your parents. Honoring your parents is a different word, and it's a chosen word. There's a word for here listening to your parents, shema, right? Shema is the root for listening. Loving is ve'ahavta, It doesn't say that. It says to honor them, which has a different meaning than those other words. And this word was chosen. Again, later on, fearing is a word, or revering is another word that's used for the relationship we have or the mode that we're supposed to be in. But honoring here is an interesting word, and it's one that one can make the argument is there for a reason. To honor is not the same as those other words. And there is a lot in the Torah about honoring your parents, and on the Talmud. There's a lot of commentary on that because, again, the Talmud recognizes that your parents might ask you to do things that, for example, are against the law. You don't have to follow your parents if they tell you to do something that you're not supposed to do. Honoring them doesn't include violating other commandments or other rules or other ethical, moral imperatives. It's not covered by it. You can't say, well, I'm just honoring my parents. So it's interesting that, again, the words were chosen the way they were. And again, there's commentary later on about it and why, again, those words are done differently. And by the way, I want to say one more thing about why honoring and why that word to me is an interesting and really powerful difference. You know, part of honoring our parents, I think I would throw out there, and again, it's my commentary on this. Honoring your parents can sometimes be something as simple as simply not speaking poorly about them. And the reason that I think that's interesting is, again, we live in a society today where people share everything, and that, people almost feel obligated to share things. I don't agree with that personally. I don't think that people have an obligation to share everything or every aspect of their lives. People are entitled to privacy, and they're entitled to probably do a little bit better job of deciding what information they trust with certain people. But there's something to be said for, again, when you don't know somebody very well and they start speaking badly about people, especially people you normally would expect them to speak highly of, you may say, okay, wow, that's really quite upsetting that they had this relationship with their parents or with anybody who you're surprised to hear about their relationship with. But again, sometimes it really doesn't look very good on you or on the person who's doing this when they start talking about their parents in a way that, again, seems unnecessarily honest and brutal. It doesn't seem like it's coming from a healthy place. And I will say that discretion and knowing what to say to certain people really does make you look better. It makes you look like you're more in touch with your knowing who you are and in what sphere you are, because again, there's information that you might intend to give people an honest picture of who you are, but by doing certain things and saying certain things about your family, you may make yourself look not so good. And I think about that a lot. I think about people who I wonder sometimes why they say things and they lead with things that not really appropriate, I think. So sometimes I think honoring our parents is something as simple as just knowing when and where to talk about our parents. So I know that for therapists, that's a big issue. But again, a therapeutic session is different than
Yes.
what I'm talking about here. I mean, there's definitely a time and a place, especially in therapy, to talk about our parents. I will say that again, and I've talked to Joyce about this lots of times, that sometimes people spend a whole lot of time talking about their parents, and you realize that they just don't want to talk about themselves. They it's much easier to do that than to start thinking about themselves and to think about what they have to do. So
responsibility for their own actions. It's
yeah.
easier to blame the past.
Yeah. And I think it reflects poorly eventually on the person when they do that. And I don't think people think about that sometimes. I don't think they think about, I don't know, maybe they're so wrapped up in anger, but it's a powerful thing. And again, I want you to understand that this is so important that it's in the 10 Commandments. I mean, literally, to understand that this is part of the fabric of society, the way that we relate to our parents, that's a very, very important thing to think about, that this is important. Our relationship with our parents is really important, but it also, again, it's not an easy decision. I mean, it's important, but it's also complex. And again, I think the 10 Commandments recognizes that. And if you look at it, the next 4 commandments are literally, well, the 3 commandments are 6 words. The next one, so this is 6, 7, 8, and 9. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. So that's 6, 7, 8, 9. And those are clearly all commandments that deal with the way we interact ethically with other people. So these are morally with other people. So these are commandments between people. And of course, as it's often pointed out, you shall not murder is not the same as you shall not kill. Killing for war, killing for protection, protecting yourself, killing somebody who's trying to kill you is definitely allowed. Killing somebody in capital punishment cases is not murder. The Hebrew word for this is used very rarely. And whenever it's used, it's clearly that this is intentional murder. This is intentional willful manslaughter. And what we call premeditated murder as well. So this is not just killing. It's not, there's a different word for killing. So again, not murdering, not committing adultery, and not stealing. And the word lo tignov is where we get the word ganef in Hebrew and Yiddish. Ganef is to steal, a thief. Of course, it's a very popular Yiddish word too. To be a ganef is to be a thief. But again, it's a Hebrew word. And it's one that, again, these commandments are very short. There's not a whole lot of text. The last one is the one that people, I think, probably forget the most, which is not to bear false witness, not to testify falsely against somebody, which is a serious offense because it can lead to convictions for these previous laws, which are all laws that, again, could technically be punishable by execution. Now, if you think about it, well, murdering, yeah, I get that. Adultery, yeah, it's punishable by murder in the Torah. Question of how often it would be executions for that. We don't know. Thievery, you'd think, is not punishable by murder, but by capital punishment, excuse me. But it is like murder, and it could be punishable if the thing that you stole was somebody else, because taking somebody hostage or taking somebody for ransom is a capital crime in Judaism. So it is something that you could be arrested for. I mean, not arrested, but if you were caught and convicted, you could be executed for it. So these are all crimes that if you bear false witness against somebody, you could wind up having them be killed, and then the blood is on your head for false testimony. So this is one of the 10 commandments. Again, I'd argue that this one is probably one that people don't remember as well. And then we get to the final commandment, lo tachmod, not to covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife or his male or female slave or his ox or his ass or anything that is your neighbor's. So that is the 10th commandment. That's a little bit longer. That one, I would argue, is the one that people probably have the hardest time remembering. I always like to ask people, if you think about it, if you went back and asked people the 10 commandments, which ones would come to their mind at the beginning? Probably not to murder, not to steal, commit adultery. Like those would be the ones that people would remember maybe the most. I don't know. But I think the ones that people would forget the most are not to covet, not to bear false witness, and maybe also not to take God's name in vain. I think those ones are ones that people might have the hardest time remembering. It's a good thing to try out on friends. If you want to see the 10 commandments, how many of the 10 commandments can they remember? See what they come up with and see which ones they have the hardest time remembering. See which ones they come up with the last. I could be wrong, but I think that this last one might be the one that they forget or kind of don't remember as one of the 10 commandments. I think there's a lot of reasons for it, not least of which is in some ways, this is the hardest commandment to follow. That's when I talked with the kids earlier today. They thought this one was a really hard one to follow. Interestingly, they didn't think honoring their parents was a hard one to follow. And those are good kids too, by the way. I will tell you, they're pretty good kids. I do think most of them don't have a hard time honoring their parents, but this one they had a hard time wrapping their heads around, because as one of the kids said, isn't everybody jealous or envious of other people? Hasn't everybody
wanted a toy or a dog or something that a neighbor had?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they felt that this is kind of not fair. So we talked about the word coveting, which again is an unusual word. It's not envy or have jealousy for. It's a different word. Tachmod is a different kind of word. So some people understand it this way. that it's literally obsessing over. It's not just I want something, it's I can't stop thinking about it. I'm obsessing about it. So I can't get it out of my head. I need to have it. And it would lead, it's the kind of coveting that would lead to people stealing, murdering, maybe again committing adultery if you're coveting your neighbor's wife. So it's the type of obsession that people, it's so detrimental that it ruins people's lives. They can't leave it alone. They can't think about anything but those things. So we talked about that, and I talked about it with the kids earlier. And I also offered this other explanation that's sometimes given, which is I said to the kids, so sometimes you see somebody and you say, oh, they have a really nice, whatever. These are teenagers or almost teenagers. So what? You really like their iPhone. I really like their computer. I really like their, well, you could say, I really like the fact that person has a boyfriend or girlfriend. But that's different than saying, I want that computer. I want that phone. I want that boyfriend or girlfriend. That's the difference. And that's what tachmod means. It's not differentiating between having something like your friend, but having only that thing that your friend has. It must be that item. And that's different than simply being jealous or envious or desiring of something, but that it must be that one thing. And nothing else will give you happiness other than having that one thing. Now, that doesn't happen a lot. That doesn't happen as frequently, hopefully, as the other stuff has. It's one thing to see your friend with a nice iPhone and you go, I really want to have that iPhone. I mean, we still do that. You don't have to be a kid to do that. You see somebody with a really nice car, you go, I really like that car. But I don't have to say, I got to have that car. I only want to have that guy's car. I say, I get another car like that. I know if I go to the dealership, I'll get another car like that car. Maybe I can even ask for the same color. So most of us can differentiate and not say, I've got to have that thing. And again, the example of this being disastrous and really being troublesome, and why, if there's a warning here, a big warning in the 10 Commandment level warning, is because if somebody's going to say, I will not be happy unless I have that man's wife, what are you going to do to get that wife? You're going to destroy that. You're going to destroy a family. You're going to maybe even be drawn into committing murder in order to get that man's wife. I've seen way too much Dateline over the last couple months. I do not want to, I'm too scared now. I have to, when I take a walk with my wife in the woods, sometimes I look around to make sure that there's not going to be, there's not going to be a knife anywhere. But no, they're taking a person's wife or husband in particular, it means, man, that person's got a target on their back. You really got, this is not normal. This is not normal desire. And so that's why it's a different word. That's why this word tachmod indicates something obsessive, dangerous, and focused, which isn't a normal just desire. So again, maybe that's what's going on here. And, and I think the kids recognize that again. And one of the kids, I was really happy. So I'm talking about this with them and, I'm trying to get this across because again, it's a big deal, when you're a young person, and it doesn't matter what age you are, but I think if you can kind of learn when you're young. And one of the young women said something really powerful. And she said, it's interesting because usually when you get something that you really want, once you get it, you find out it really wasn't as great as you thought. And she said something that I thought was really powerful, that again, materialistic things don't really bring us happiness. It's very fleeting. The joy that comes with having what we wanted doesn't last a long time. And I was glad to hear that as a young woman, she already understood that finding external happiness, that kind of joy in other things is really not the way we should be living our lives. So I was really proud of her for recognizing that, and recognizing that maybe is another thing here, which is that being so focused on having things is not going to bring us joy. So I was really proud of them for kind of coming up with those understandings and and those insights. So it's good to know that they're kind of on the right track when it comes to prioritizing and figuring out what's important in life.
Mhm.
So I was really proud of them. And again, it's nice to see that the kids are kind of thinking about these issues and priorities and values. So it's one of the 10 commandments. So here's the last parts of this. All the people witnessed the thunder and lightning, the blare of the horn, and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they fell back and stood at a distance. You speak to us, they said to Moses, and we will obey. And that's what they said. Nishma, we will listen. So here we have, we will listen after they've already said Nishma. But here's the thing that everybody focuses on. The people said, let not God speak to us lest we die. So whatever they heard at Mount Sinai with these 10 commandments scared them.
Mhm.
Moses answered the people, be not afraid, for God has come only in order to test you, and in order that the fear of him may be ever with you, so that you do not go astray. And again, fear is one of the ways to translate the word yirah. It's also, we said, reverence or awe,
Mhm.
so that you do not go astray. So the people remained at a distance while Moses approached the thick cloud where God was. And the Lord said to Moses, thus shall you say to the Israelites, you yourselves saw that I spoke to you from the very heavens. So you all see that I spoke to all of you. With me, therefore, you shall not make any gods of silver, nor shall you make for yourselves any gods of gold. Make for me an altar of earth and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your sacrifices of well-being, your sheep and your oxen. In every place where I cause my name to be mentioned, I will come to bless you. And it finishes with this part. And if you make for me an altar of stones, do not build it of hewn stones, for by wielding your tool upon them, you have profaned them. Do not ascend my altar by steps, that your nakedness may not be exposed upon it. And that is the last line, as you can see in the Torah portion. These lines about the way you make your altar. So once they have the laws, and again, there's an interesting question here, which is the people only hear the 10 commandments. And we've talked about this before, and I think maybe Mike, you may have made this point before. Would the Israelites have heard more if they had said,
Rabbi, come back. Rabbi's frozen.
Oh, my goodness.
Mike, Rabbi.
Let's get him another internet person.
Interesting. The 10 commandments. No other God, no idol, no swearing. Remember the Sabbath. Honor father, mother. No murder, no adultery, no stealing, no false witness, no covet of neighbor's stuff. 8 are don't.
No.
2 are positives. I
sent him a note.
There he is.
happened again, but that was definitely just me that time. So we're basically done right now. But Mike, are you still on? Mike,
I'm present.
So wasn't that your point once? I recall in previous years.
Probably, I wasn't really paying attention. I kind of left the Torah portion. I was kind of upset today.
Okay, so
I'm sure you were.
So listen, one of the things I wanted to tell you, Mike, was this idea here that we just saw was this idea that maybe they would have gotten more laws themselves if they hadn't said to Moses, you go talk to God. And I think that this is an important part of what we're left with, which is were the people too afraid to hear more? And is the 10 Commandments, where the 10 Commandments kind of what we were left with because we couldn't take any more of God's presence. So the rest of the 600 commandments that we get, and remember, up until this time, we've only gotten 2 commandments. We've gotten the commandment to circumcise our boys at 8 days, and we've gotten a commandment to have a Passover sacrifice. But those are the only commandments that we've had up until this moment. The rest of the commandments come from now on. And as we talked about in the Midrash class yesterday, maybe those 2 commandments were given because we had to have those 2 commandments in order to have the rest of the commandments. In order to be redeemed, we had to be circumcised and we had to have that first Passover meal. But now, from now on, all the commandments kind of emanate out off of the 10 commandments. But again, maybe the people only got to hear these 10 commandments because they didn't want to hear anymore. They didn't feel like they could be in God's presence anymore. And so this is an important moment for the people. And the rest of the laws that we get, including next week when we're reading Mishpatim, we're going to be getting more and more laws, a lot more than 10 in the next Torah portion. And in the rest of the Torah, we're going to get 600 more. But the rest of them come through Moses. The rest of the laws we get come through an intermediary. And maybe we wouldn't have had an intermediary if we had been courageous enough to hear the rest of God's words.
And this is another lesson, that fear frequently stops us from learning what we need to learn, of doing what we need to do, of acting like we need to act. Fear is a big, big handicap, and we need to learn to face our fears and overcome them instead of giving into them.
Absolutely. And that people definitely don't seem strong enough to hear God's message on their own. So it's an interesting question. What if, again, I want to thank, and I sent it out. Hopefully everybody got it. I sent the article that David and Cheryl sent from the Wall Street Journal. A lot of people, I sent it out to the Tuesday morning class too. It said dad. I noticed it didn't say David. That was not a Freudian slip. I just typed it bad. But I sent it out to everybody, and because I thought it was Leon Kass's article about Exodus, I thought was really a great overview of the book. Right. So if you didn't get it, I'll send it out to people again.
We'll send it to you.
Please. Oh no, I sent it out. I emailed it to everybody. You didn't get it? I emailed it. Okay, so I emailed it yesterday, and I will send it out again. I put it on a.
We got it, Rabbi.
So I'll send it out to people who didn't get it. But what it reminds us is that Exodus begins with the redemption story, with the deliverance and redemption out of Egypt. It moves into the law, which we're in now. Right. And then the last part of the last section of it is about creating sacred space and finding a way to worship and connect with God. And so we saw it right at the end of this portion when we get the laws of the Mizbeach, of creating an altar, that God recognizes right away that now that we have the law, or now that we're beginning to get the law, or we're introduced to the law, we also need to be connected to God. So redemption, the law, and also holy connection. All 3 of those elements are in Exodus. And again, Kass's argument, it's really the focal point of Judaism and really of all definitely our religious tradition, that without those things set up, none of the other things work. And so it's a really great article. So I'll send it out again to people. And thank you to the 2 of you for sending that to me. And I really wanted to get it out to everybody because Leon Kass wrote a great book on Genesis that came out a few years ago, probably about 10 years ago, the Genesis book that he wrote. And now he's written one on Exodus, which is, again, such an important book. I shared, this book that I had on the Exodus Richard Friedman wrote, but again, a lot of great books. I shared one last year with us that Dennis Prager wrote on Exodus
Yeah.
just the last couple of years. So there's a lot of great books on Exodus. The book Exodus by Leon Uris has nothing to do with that Exodus, but it's another great book.
Another good book.
That's not that Leon, but Leon Cass's book on Exodus is coming out, and I will definitely pop it around to people when it post it up when it's available. So again, everybody, in the meantime, stay healthy and safe, and again, I hope people continue to stay focused on the good stuff that we're doing. And we're getting ready for around the corner. We have Purim, one of our great holidays of joy and celebration. So we're going to do some fun stuff for Purim, and we're working on that already. And we're starting to feel springtime. Before we know it, it's going to be opening day in baseball, and we'll be able to look forward to that fresh cut grass.
We got to do the Super Bowl first.
That's true. I'm already looking at it. I have nothing vested in the Super Bowl other than I hope it's a good game for everybody. And please, I hope everybody stays safe and healthy during that week too, everybody.
Before we get to that, I need to express appreciation for this class. I cannot tell you how inspirational it is for me every single week. It is a blessing to be here and to learn, and I thank you, Rabbi.
Hey, thank
Amen.
you.
Amen.
Thank you. And thank you guys. Thank you guys.
To highlight this class Tuesday, any class I'm taking, so much with the Torah and the prophets, I'm just loving it. I have time in my life now to do what I couldn't do the rest of my life before.
Well, we hope you stay in good health, and I'm so glad you're taking those steps too, Diane, to be healthy. So that's a wonderful thing, and thank you. And again, I love the fact that Diane's also life hacking right now. She's trying to make the most out of life on a daily basis. She was working out yesterday during the Tuesday morning class, which I think is awesome. So again, taking care of your body and taking care of your mind, and again, that's a wonderful thing too. It's great that you're doing that. You're in such great health right now, Diana. I mean, at least it seems as you're doing so much to help your health. That's awesome too.
Trying.
Keep in good health. Again, everybody else, please stay healthy over these coming days, and we look forward to seeing everybody in person, God willing, soon. Harvey and I were over at the synagogue today working on how to beautify that place too. So that's one of the things that we're working on, and we're hoping to take advantage of this time that we're not in the synagogue to fix it up. So we're going to be putting in, God willing, new bathrooms. I don't know. You'll see it when we're back in. All right. All right, everybody. Good.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Please stay
Love you,
healthy.
Joy.
Sorry about the technical stuff. All right, everybody. Take care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.
Bye.